Simplicity can be beautiful. ASCII is beautiful. The words simplicity can be beautiful feel so intrinsically human, I can't tell whether it's something I made up or something that's been quoted and requoted time and time again. It's a sentence I thought to myself while falling asleep one night. I had been giving ASCII text, art, and graphics a lot of thought over the past weeks or months. I'm not an artist, so for me, ASCII is something I value greatly for the freedom it gives me and other creators. From the occasional Discord copy pasta to making my own ASCII games, I've learned the practical and beautiful nature of ASCII. Simplicity can be beautiful, and by extension, ASCII is beautiful. By now, modern computers have had nearly a full century of history. For a very long time, those who operated computers did so without any sort of graphical view. Whether using paper scripts, punch cards, or other means of operation, the use of a computer was not done through text. With the advent of the user interface came the need to have standards for what is text. That's why, in the 60s, the organization that would later become ANSI created a standard for which characters would be displayed on screens. This standard would be called ASCII, or the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. Despite its long-winded name, the concept is quite simple. It's a question. How do we include the most characters within the least amount of memory? This question led to a few iterations and, by 1986, its final iteration. Currently, ASCII contains 256 characters, or 32 bytes of information. This includes 32 characters, which are reserved for control characters, essentially the text that determines what the end of a line is or where there needs to be a line break. When computers, programs, and games first started incorporating text, the limits for what could be stored, used, and displayed were extremely low. A simple JPEG image in modern times can be 32 million times larger than the amount of bytes the ASCII standard took. With this necessity for a small size, the ASCII standard was born. Since then, much more complexity would be needed when handling text. Not everyone uses the same 26 letters of the alphabet to text or tweet. And, surprisingly enough, other languages do exist. Finally, by some eldritch nightmare, emojis came into existence. Therefore, as a need to include an ever-increasing amount of characters emerged, new standards were necessary. People tend to equate ASCII with some of these new standards, yet ASCII was built on a necessity for keeping the character count as minimal as possible. In this way, ASCII and the new standards were opposites. The current de facto leader of these standards is Unicode, led by a nonprofit in California. Unicode, unlike ASCII, is a standard focused on being as inclusive as possible to new characters. Everything from the letter A to Japanese kana to the pleading emoji can be found in Unicode. With much more powerful computers, Unicode is not limited by size, evidenced by its 144,000 characters. Unicode is still being updated, with its latest updates being in 2020. For most purposes, ASCII and Unicode are not interchangeable, but in common conversation have a huge overlap. If someone were to say ASCII Graphics and included the occasional katakana or Chinese character, there wouldn't be an angry mob saying, "This isn't real ASCII." ASCII encompasses what I like to think of as simple characters, while Unicode is that plus complex characters such as emojis. If I were to put the shrug emoji on screen and asked whether it was ASCII or Unicode exclusive, you would most likely say ASCII. However, due to the inclusion of the kana su from the Japanese language, this is Unicode exclusive. On the other hand, if I put up the actual shrugging emoji, it's very clearly Unicode, as it's more complex of a character. For the purposes of this video, I'll be calling anything that is a simple character ASCII. ASCII art has existed for a very long time. People have been trying to make art out of the most obscure things since time immemorial. That's why it comes to me as no surprise that even as early as the 60s, people saw a set of 256 characters and sought to create art from it. One of the earliest ASCII artists was Kenneth Knowlton. He began his work in 1966, only a few years after the creation of ASCII. At the time, he was an employee of Bell Labs, which was at the frontier of computers and technology. One of his most famous pieces was Studies in Perception 1. Although it does not seem all of the characters within this painting are ASCII, by any modern and common definition, this would be ASCII art. Knowlton and people like him were the foundation of ASCII art, the extremely beautiful side of ASCII. Searching ASCII graphics into YouTube, I came up with a couple of projects I would like to showcase to prove my point. There are realistically two ways I see of making ASCII art. The first is done by building something new from the ground up, creating a game or game engine entirely built around ASCII graphics. The other approach, however, and what I believe is to be the more common approach, is using post-processing methods to convert a normal 2D or 3D project into ASCII art. This method allows the creator to edit the game and create the game like any other project. However, the way it renders for the user is in ASCII format. 1337D00M, or Leet Doom, is a project by Dario Zubovic, which has the original Doom rendered entirely in ASCII. Given its nature, I can only assume this project takes the first approach mentioned. This game was most likely built from the ground up using ASCII graphics. There is a chance that it uses ASCII post-processing on a prototype of Doom, but I can't be sure. What makes Leet Doom work is the ASCII is small enough to work almost as a large pixel. ASCII art, at times, involves a lot of interpretation. Therefore, the smaller a character, the more akin it is to a pixel on your screen. The pixels on your screen are so small and blend so well together that they show the video you are watching. In such a fast-paced 3D shooter as Doom, where the ASCII character is to be larger, the game might not have worked anywhere near as well. One small project, like Leet Doom, I was able to find was David Macias's ASCII FPS. According to the description of the video, this uses a normal 3D prototype of a game the author had lying around and post-processes it using ASCII characters. There's absolutely no shame in post-processing for creating ASCII graphics, as long as the post-processing is well tweaked, or the original assets work well for ASCII. It's hard to tell the difference. Much in the same vein as Leet Doom, the ASCII mod for Hollow Knight converts the majority of the Hollow Knight game into ASCII graphics. The mod takes the unique approach of blending together ASCII characters and normal rendered objects. The majority of normally rendered objects are UI elements or text, which can be very difficult to read when in ASCII graphics. The rest of the game, however, is in ASCII. All I can say about it is that it's beautiful, taking the fact Hollow Knight is a grayscale game to its benefit and providing more of an authentic and genuine feel. Beyond that, it's able to manage small characters in a way that remains mostly visible to the player. This can be credited to the distinction in color between the character and the rest of the game. Your character in Hollow Knight contains much more white and much brighter white than the rest of the game, leading it to work much better in an ASCII format. A lot of distinguishing between objects in ASCII graphics is not the characters themselves, but the contrast between them in size, density, or most importantly, color. Another form of creating fascinating ASCII art is creating engines or projects built around ASCII. Instead of using post-processing methods as an afterthought on an already existing material, this format allows the creator to build something from the ground up using ASCII as the center point. This kind of project is much less common in a way that could be considered artistic, like the last few examples, as it is a lot more labor intensive. The first example I found was a project called ASCII by Gumix, or Jumix? I don't know. It's a browser-based engine, built on top of ASCII Graphics. The most interesting thing about this project is it's entirely in 3D. The player is able to go up mountains or hills or go in water, which can reflect the trees and houses near it. Having played multiple demos of the game, the graphics over time have gotten extremely good. The trees, houses, and ground from one version to the newer versions are extremely detailed. This is an absolutely fascinating and beautiful look into what 3D ASCII can be. The next is a series of projects created by the YouTube user Dino1729. The project that caught my attention was his demo of ray tracing in C++ using entirely ASCII characters. The best way ray tracing can be described with my limited knowledge is that it's a very realistic looking simulation of the way light bounces and reflects off objects. Obviously, by that definition, ray tracing is extremely resource intensive, as you're simulating light bouncing, so it's an interesting idea to apply it to ASCII graphics where real time it could be less resource intensive. Dino1729 has two parts to his ray tracing tests. One on a simple rotating sphere, and one on multiple stationary objects with a moving camera. Between the two parts, it's clear how amazing the concept of more advanced 3D techniques being implemented in ASCII can be. Dino1729 also created some other artistic prototypes, such as zooming in on the Mandelbrot set in ASCII Graphics. Zooming into the Mandelbrot set, or any fractal, usually requires a lot of graphical fidelity in order to view each individual set as separate. Although I don't consider Dino's Mandelbrot zoom to be very clear, the idea that one can create fractals using nothing more than ASCII graphics is fascinating. ASCII as art has had a long history, longer than even three-dimensional graphics. However, I believe that ASCII art has a long future ahead of it. With small prototypes attempting ray tracing in ASCII, to FPSs rendered entirely in ASCII, eventually fully fleshed out three-dimensional games could be built using ASCII graphics to create a unique experience. The majority of what I touched on in the ASCII art section was three-dimensional. However, the origins and popular use of ASCII as graphics is two-dimensional roguelikes. Roguelikes have an extremely long history for video games, coming from its namesake Rogue. Since its release in 1980, a quote-unquote roguelike is any game that attempts to capture the essence of the original Rogue game, much like a Metroidvania will try to capture the essence of Metroid or Castlevania. The original Rogue was rendered entirely in ASCII graphics, and could hardly be considered beautiful, but it was practical. Since then, ASCII graphics have become much more beautiful without losing any of the practicality. Rendering in two-dimensional ASCII format is much less graphically intensive than most games. It's a joke within the roguelike communities that most games like NetHack can run on literal potatoes or toasters. On the other hand, ASCII graphics, if done well, can be very informative for how much is being shown on screen. Now, onto what made me originally want to make this video. About a year ago, I offered my help to a small open source indie roguelike built on ASCII graphics called Oddfolk. Towards the start of COVID, work on the project slowed down significantly, and I strayed from the project as I got busy from school. Since then, the small roguelike has disappeared off the face of the internet, along with its creator's website. However, from that time, I not only have some screenshots, but a fully working prototype. The one thing I can say about the game is that it's absolutely beautiful. The way the trees move and the way the water acts, it's all beautiful. Before this point, I had never known that ASCII could not only be practical, but beautiful. The project made me fall in love with ASCII graphics, not just as an eccentric art form or an entirely practicality-focused graphics form, but as a combination of the two. With certain coding libraries, I have begun now 2 projects entirely using ASCII graphics. The biggest of the two, simply titled TARPG, short for Test ARPG, started as a test and world generation. I kept adding new features and even trying to recreate it in 2 different languages, and ended up with a prototype I really like. Although I don't consider it as pretty as Oddfolk, it's something I can say I'm proud of. But I'm sure there are plenty of odd folks out there that I don't know about, all showcasing the beauty and power of ASCII. The combination of practicality and beauty for ASCII graphics has been a very recent development. For the longest time, ASCII has either entirely been relegated to simple looking roguelikes or copy pastas, or at the most, the occasional tech demo. However, there's been interest in recent history to continue the history and legacy of ASCII graphics. Looking further online, games like Door in the Woods takes the ASCII roguelike trope and elevates its beauty in new and creative ways. And, obviously, Oddfolk took a game like Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead and reinvented the way a game like that looks. As someone who's not an artist by nature or trade, ASCII graphics gives me the power to create my own art. ASCII graphics left alone are extremely basic. However, what makes them beautiful is how the characters are colored, the way the tiles interact with each other, and what you do with each individual tile. I would say it's similar in vein as pixel art, something else I've taken a liking to. It's a niche of art, one dictated by nerdy coders and mathematicians. The beauty of ASCII comes from a combination of its inherent beauty, objective practicality, its uniqueness, and the work the creator puts into their creation. Simplicity can be beautiful, and by extension, ASCII is beautiful.